Well, Dwayne, it's good to see you today. How is the weather in Austin, Texas?
It's rainy today, Tim, and it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful day whenever it's raining. So thanks, Tim. How about there in Bernie, Texas, where the gas prices are skyrocketing, I believe?
Yeah, 20 cents in the last 10 days. We've had rain overnight and into the day, but no one here is complaining about rain because we can always use rain in South Texas. So, well,
Amen.
Dwayne, it's good to have you with me today. My name is Tim Dietrich. I'm Director of Professional Services at Mortarstone. And joining me today is Dwayne McNally, who is our Chief Operating Officer at Mortarstone. We're excited to have you as a part of our second webinar featuring our annual generosity report. And today we want to focus on generosity unlocked, teaching and engaging every age. This is a real exciting thing for us, Dwayne. And for those of you who are joining us today, we do want you to know that we are recording the webinar. And after the call, we will be sending an email of that recording to you along with the slide deck. And again, if you want more information about Mortarstone, you can visit us at mortarstone.com. And as always, if you want to find out the latest of what's going on at Mortarstone, follow us on LinkedIn. You can find Mortarstone on all social media platforms at simply one word, Mortarstone, and that'll get you there. So, Dwayne, as we get started today, why don't you talk to us a little bit about Mortarstone and some of the different things that Mortarstone offers before we get into the actual data today?
Great, Tim. And even before I go there, let me just say if anyone has questions, feel free to either utilize the chat or to be able to put something into the Q&A, and we'll be watching that and try to get back to the questions. And we may need to validate if the chat is actually open for everybody. Nikki, if you could double check that, that would be great. But let me just say, Tim, back to your question. Mortarstone was started by a couple guys about 13 years ago who were doing a capital campaign for their church, started to realize that they really had no insight into actually the quantity of givers or the quality of givers. And they decided that they needed to change that. And so they started building a platform that takes data from church management systems and provides all kinds of analytics and incredible insights that churches can build strategies from. And so not only do we have the software, Tim, but one of the people on our team provides guidance and can walk alongside a church who may know that they need to do something, but not sure where to get started. He can help with that. And Tim, you provide coaching and insights into how people can engage their givers and disciple their givers and do gift strategies. And so we offer a lot of different things that all focus on how do we help people engage the givers, which is the quantity of givers, disciple, which is the quality, operate with excellence, and then lead with insights and not intuition. So Tim, that's who we are and what we want to do.
That's great, Dwayne. Thank you for that introduction of Mortarstone. For those who are new, we recognize that many of you who are joining our webinar today are very familiar with Mortarstone. Many of you use our data analytics. Some of you are coaching clients. But for those who are new, we do want you to know a little bit more about our background and where we get started. So, Dwayne, we're focusing on the generational study that was a part of the 2024 annual report. And one of the things that we wanted to begin today was just the simple question: how do you talk with givers? Dwayne, I think in a lot of situations, our churches, many churches, just kind of have a one size fits all message that they
Yep.
give, whether that's through a curriculum or a sermon series or an email or a newsletter article. Dwayne, what becomes the challenge when we just do one blanket generalized message with our givers in our churches?
Tim, that's a great question. And actually something, this is my third conversation on this set of data today, Tim, and this is a conversation that came up in each one. And the key difference is the fact of all givers are not alike. Boomers start out trusting an organization until it's not trustworthy. Gen Z and millennials have a distrust of institutions as a starting point until it's proven trustworthy. So even starting with a trust factor is huge. And so that's one of the things, Tim, that I see in the fact that we have to recognize, just like every communication that we do, we have to recognize who the receiver is. And not all receivers across all generations are not the same. Gen X is probably closer to boomers, and millennials and Gen Z think differently than the rest. And so actually the part of the conversation we had is the fact that when you're sending out annual giving statements, when you're doing quarterly giving statements, you may want to think about what it looks like to communicate differently, because Gen Z and millennials are focused on vision. And so how do you talk about your impact differently in that situation than to your boomers and your Gen X? And so there's just a lot of factors that need to be taken into consideration here, because the thing that is true is if I'm talking to a group that is comprised of half boomers and half Gen Z, half the group is not going to get the message. And so
Yeah,
we have to think about how we communicate and create translations in those conversations.
yeah, and Dwayne, I think you've really done a good job of capturing the value side of it. But another reason we need to, think about how we segment that communication comes down to the valuables. We know that 74% of all the nation's privately held wealth is owned by people born before 1964. So there is a wealth disparity among the generations, most of that belonging to the boomers and whoever remains from the silent generation. Gen X is kind of on the way, if you will. But I think that what we see in the research that we do from US Census data, statistics, just from different sources, Gen Z and millennials are challenged because of a lower median income. Gen Z earns about $30,000 a year less than the national median income is, which is about $77,000. But more than ever, millennials and Gen Z are strapped with personal debt and student loan debt. So they have a really, really high debt to income ratio, and that makes it challenging too. So when we talk about giving, the concept of giving is going to fall on their ears differently, not just because of their values, but the lack of discretionary income that the younger generations have. So this is something that we have really got to become more intentional in how we think about, Dwayne.
Hey, Tim, I totally agree with that. And I think the other aspect of what you just talked about is the fact of, you talked about, well, boomers, 1964 and before that, the youngest ones are now 60. There will be 61 this year. They're all looking towards a movement from a cash flow based lifestyle to an asset based cash or based lifestyle. Thinking about what the conversations and the discussions that need to be had there about, back to your point about the total wealth and asset-based conversations, looks differently for them than the Gen X, who are actually in the high prime earning potential of their lives. And so
Yeah.
so each of those groups have a different set of challenges and a different set of opportunities for the church to engage.
So, Dwayne, let's get into the data here a little bit, and let's take a look at what we see happening in median giving and giving participation by generation. And Dwayne, we can leave this on the screen and people can take a quick look at it. But why don't you just kind of talk us through the table as a whole, and then let's circle back and maybe pull out two or three really points of interest from the data that we're revealing here.
Great. So what we took a look at was, let's look at each of the major generations that we're talking about right now. And we then took a look at all the givers, the giving units, and took a look at what the median amount given was. And so I always look at this and think through the lens of one of our stats that we put into the report, Tim, was that it takes 10 Gen Zs to replace one boomer's giving. Well, the interesting thing is the fact of, and here we see that we lost quite a few of the silent generation over this past over these past 4 years, and that number is only going to increase in that. And then there is, just this whole aspect of the good news is the number of boomers or millennials and Gen Z, the number of people giving is increasing, but they've got to increase at a pretty substantial rate to replace the boomers giving. And so I just saw someone put something into the chat, Tim, and it was asking, is this national data? So this is looking at the data set that we put the report together for, which was from 2021 through 2024. And it's looking at the 537 churches that we could pull our data from. So this is hard data that is actual giving data. So Tim, I believe it was 1 million family units, basically giving units, and over $13 billion worth of giving is represented in these stats. And so that's where the conversation is. The question, can this be stratified by income level? I think that's a great question, and we can go, within Mortarstone, you can go into specifically around your church to understand more of that, but at where we're at in this data, we do not have that level of insight at this point.
Yeah, we can look at the data over and against income, and that would be one of the wonderful tables that we have in Mortarstone Data Analytics.
Yep.
Yeah, Dwayne, I think your point, the silent generation and boomers, they're giving more, even though their participation is less. And again, that could be perhaps just a little more discretionary income as they move into retirement and they start to see that passive income come to them from Social Security and IRAs and other annuities. Gen X is also really interesting because even though their participation went up, we saw them almost go down 10 points over the 4 years in the size of their median gift. I concur with you. Churches have really worked for years on how do we get younger? How do we grow younger as a congregation? And we're doing great by reaching Gen Z and millennials in terms of participation. But again, because of the age and stage of their life, it's going to be really tough for them to be able to give at a higher rate than they currently are. One of the things that we've recently added, Dwayne, at Mortarstone has been a new table, data table in Mortarstone that helps our giving in our churches be segmented by generations. And that should tell you how committed Mortarstone is to understanding the generations and communicating with them. Dwayne, talk to us a little bit about this feature and perhaps maybe even where it's located in the software so that people who are Mortarstone customers can get in and actually know where to find this.
So Tim, we're excited because as we've been doing the research, as you said, we started realizing, man, there's a lot for us to understand because so most of the places where you can go into Mortarstone and take a look at giving by age, we've also added this generational giving. So under the Insights tab, you can go in and find this in the giving breakdowns, and so find it there. But I think the key that I find as I look at this for a lot of different churches is most churches, you're finding that the lost generation is gone out of here. The greatest generation, silent generation, is dropping, but you can really start to see from one period to the next what's changed in the giving. And so in the church, in the example that you've got here, you see that Gen Alpha, which is the youngest generation, which is still there's a lot of question marks as far as that data, just simply because they're typically under someone else's household. But you see giving for this church has actually gone up pretty well across all the generations, but specifically, it looks like Gen X has had some really strong increases.
Yeah, that's good. And again, if you go to Mortarstone under the Insights, the place where I go to find it is the Summaries tab, and just simply scroll down to the bottom of the page, and that's where you'll find this table in your Mortarstone data. Again, I think this is really useful, Dwayne, because when I think about generations, that's how churches do staffing, right? We staff according to generations. And so to be able to have this kind of information available for what we used to call back in the day age graded staffing, this would be a wonderful insight and a wonderful tool for them as they disciple, under the purview of their ministry area, whether it be a young adult or a student minister or even a senior adult minister in some
Yep.
cases. I realize a lot of churches don't have senior adult ministers anymore, Dwayne, but they do have senior adult ministries
Yep.
and gatherings of those folks. So,
And Tim, if you go back to that slide for a second, if you go into the upper right corner of where that screen is at, you can see you can toggle between dollars and households. And so it's an important thing to recognize the fact of, it'd be interesting if this was live to be able to go look and see what's changed in the number of households, because oftentimes we see giving going up, especially with boomers. We see the giving going up, but the number of households actually going down. And so there's some things to actually dig into as if you look in at this page. So, Tim, sorry,
excellent.
keep
Nope, that's
moving.
okay. That was a good catch, Dwayne. So let's talk a little bit about the takeaways. And again, this goes back to the report that we released last month. And the first takeaway was for the first time in 2024, Gen X gave more total dollars than boomers, although it took more givers to accomplish it. And I think that this is one of those understated shifts that we saw in the data. I mean, we had to go back and look twice, Dwayne, right? We were like,
Yep.
wait a minute, did Gen X actually outgive boomers? Sure, it took more, obviously, of them to do it, but they gave a lot more money. Dwayne, what do we make of this? What does it represent, and what can we do to really strengthen and secure the giving of Gen X in light of the fact that two tables ago, we were seeing that Gen X's giving actually dropped 9.3% over the 4 years. What are some good strategy points that we can give practitioners?
So I think the key, Tim, we already touched on it, is one is Gen X. They're probably in their, I think they're 45 and older, 45 to 60,
Hmm.
basically. So they're in the prime of their earning years. And so their cash flow is probably the best it's ever going to be. And so how do you engage them in that? But also, how do you start to set the stage? Because eventually, those who are on the later end of that, the older Gen X's, they're going to start moving into a asset-based lifestyle. And so how do you disciple them? How do you equip them for the season that they're in today? But how do you begin to disciple them and engage them towards the lifestyle that they'll be in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? Because I think that's part of the key challenge that we have here is the fact that they're not always going to be in their prime earning years. They're going to become the next boomers. And Tim, to your point, we actually celebrated that when we saw this data that Gen X gave more than the boomers, but it also pointed to the fact that the boomer giving was starting to drop, and we were going to start to see the transition of next generations actually give more than the boomers over these next few years.
Yeah, and Dwayne, I think another thing we've got to remember about Gen X is they are not only in their highest earning power, but they also have a lot of major big ticket demands on that
Yep.
income.
Yep.
So they're not only trying to parent their children and get
And
them
send them to college.
to college, they're
Yep.
not, and they're also trying to get them married, right? And if you've ever had a child get married, you know that that's going to leave a mark. But at the same time, Dwayne, they're also trying to parent their parents who may be in that situation where they're starting to worry about long-term care or memory care for their parents. So Gen X has a lot of financial pressure, I guess I should say.
Yep.
And even though they may be making more money than they ever thought they would see, they're also in that situation where they're facing currently more demands than they're perhaps ever going to see. So
Yep.
that's a great ministry opportunity when you work with Gen X, is just to understand their situation in life. And if you talk to Gen Xers, kind of about what's going on in their lives, they'll finish your sentences for you. You know, they'll talk about college, they'll talk about weddings, they'll talk about the concerns they have of their parents. That's a real important thing to identify with and to actually care about with them, because a lot of times Gen Xers kind of feel like they're alone facing all of these challenges financially in their lives. The second takeaway, Dwayne, you alluded to a little bit earlier, and that's that it takes 3.4 millennials or 10 Gen Z givers to replace one boomer. I don't know how much more we need to say about this, Dwayne, but what are some of the things? Uh, I mean, Dwayne, if you go back to your ministry when you were an executive pastor, how would this fall on you as an executive pastor, and what might be some practical two or three first steps you would take if you were exposed to this data for the first time?
So I think, Tim, great question. And I think there's several things that come to mind as I think about that. One is, where can I go find some more Gen Zs and millennials? A whole lot more. But the other thing is I need to start talking with my boomers about how do we create a pathway to the future so that the Gen Z and millennials can actually begin to step up into the giving. And, I think that there's a lot of things in this conversation. Um, I mean, boomers are a part of our future. They're not just the past. So how do we actually help them to help us create a go forward conversation? But also the thing that I know is, as I've talked to multiple people today, our whole concept of how we taught and passed on giving to the next generation is broken. Gen Z and millennials, they are looking at their funding is just as likely or more likely to go outside the church than to the church. And so thinking about the teaching, the discipling, the engagement there is going to be important. And when I think about even the next generation, Gen Alpha, Tim, it's time to teach the parents who have Gen Alpha how to actually engage those young kids into a understanding of what we give, why we give, and where we give, and begin that discipleship journey even there, because I think that's a key part of even moving beyond the generations that we're looking at now, is looking at those next generations and equipping them so that they can actually understand what giving means.
Yeah. And Dwayne, I totally agree with what you've said. And Dwayne, we've had this conversation on multiple occasions. The church did not teach me how to give.
Right.
My parents taught me how to give.
Yep.
And somehow, as we think about boomers and Gen X as generations, what are we doing to equip them to teach their children and grandchildren about giving and generosity? Because it's real important that they have that education. I grew up as a pastor's kid, Dwayne. So, as far as I can remember, old enough to remember, when I got up on Sunday morning and got ready for church, did you have your Sunday school quarterly? Did you have your Bible? Did you have your offering envelope? And those were that was just like we do, like when we leave house now. It's like cell phone, keys, wallet, right? You're
Yep.
checking all your pockets, and we've got to really become more intentional about that. So that brings us into our first myth, Dwayne, that we want to address today, and that is churches can continue to rely on baby boomers to provide the majority of funding for the church's financial goals and objectives. We've already pointed out that Gen X is kind of exceeding the level of giving of our boomers. And I think it's important, especially as we see some of the churn in the report that we're seeing in givers. A lot of that churn is not the younger people. A lot of that churn is the boomers and the silent generation. Some of that by death, but some of that just by attrition. Dwayne, we don't really have anything about that in this presentation, but I wonder if you might take a moment and just talk about the churn which kind of gets back into last month's webinar.
Yep.
Some of the concerning things we see about giving churn over the 4 years of the report.
So the thing that we saw that stands out to me, Tim, is the fact that 50% of the people who gave in 2021 did not give to the same church in 2024. So there's multiple things that I talk to churches about is the fact of one thing that is true is if you haven't taught and you don't have a consistent approach to teaching on giving, you're not going to, your people in your pews do not understand what you care about and what you're planning on doing. And what giving means to you. And so that's one of the key things, Tim, that I see from that data is the fact of, I don't even want to, there's a lot of reasons why people are not giving to the same church. But the key is the fact of if we're not teaching and we're not discipling, we're relying on someone else's teaching and discipling for our giving. And that's not where any of us should be sitting at.
That's exactly right. Let's get to the next myth. And that, again, we've already kind of touched on. Millennials and Gen Z will increase their giving as their income increases and will replace the giving of boomers and Gen X. Dwayne, I think that there's some dangerous assumptions that we have about the next generation. And we've talked a lot about being Texas boys. We've talked a lot about that old John Wayne movie, The Alamo, and how they sent the message for General Sam Houston to come to the rescue. And so General Houston got the message, but he got there and it was too late.
Too late?
It could
Yep.
be that millennials and Gen Z are on the way, but it could be a little too late by the time they actually get to the earning power of their careers. Um, what is so dangerous about this assumption, Dwayne?
Well, so there's multiple things that I see in it, Tim. One of the key things, and I think we've already touched on it, is the fact of millennials and Gen Z give differently. Without teaching and without discipling, they look at they have a portfolio. One of the conversations I had in the meeting right before this, a guy was talking about the fact of, there's a lot of Gen Z and millennials who set aside 10%, but at the end of every month, they go decide where they're going to give the money. It's not an automatic that anything's going to go to the church. And so if we don't change that level of conversation and that level of insight, then we're going to miss the boat in that conversation. And so I think assuming in the trust of institutions where the generations sit on that conversation is going to have a huge bearing. I know more boomers distrust the church today because of all the scandals and everything else than what was there before, but they started out trusting. And even when I was young, when you were young, Tim, I mean, we're old now, we're both boomers. We trusted the church. We trusted the church to disperse the funds the way that the church decided to disperse the funds. Gen Z and millennials, they're not believing that today, and I don't believe they're going to change that without teaching and discipleship. And so that's where their income may get to the point where they could replace it, but their giving patterns and how they give today without that changing will not replace a boomers and Gen X giving.
Yeah, and maybe won't ever. That's
Right.
I think that's the ultimate fear, right? Is
Yep.
that they're never going to do that. The one study I keep going back to is the one from U.S. Census data that says that their projection is only 8% of those born since 1980 will have the opportunity to earn as much as their parents earned.
Yep.
Only 8%. So we need to hear that statistic, and we need to make sure that we are being proactive instead of throwing up our hands and giving up, or even worse, making assumptions that it's all going to be okay, because eventually they're going to get there and catch up. That's maybe one of the most dangerous assumptions that we see being made in churches today.
Well, and Tim, I think, there's a lot of people that say, well, the silent generation gave way to the boomers who have given way to the Gen X. And we've seen that those have all followed the perspective of over time, those will catch up.
Right.
but all those generations thought the same about institutions and the journey to get there.
Right.
And that's, I think, the challenge that's different. And someone asked the question of whether they'll be able to get a copy of the proposal or of the presentation, and the answer is yes. We'll send out a copy of the presentation as well as the recording.
Yeah. So, Dwayne, one of the things that we've been doing at Mortarstone is we've been trying to sit down and uh, so for those of you on the webinar, I spend most of my time on the not-for-profit side of the fence because my hope is to be able to learn from not-for-profits and bring that into the church space. And so I do a lot of reading and a lot of research around next gen generosity. And this is a source, this is something that I put together from multiple sources. The primary source is Michael Moody from Indiana University Lilly School of Philanthropy. And if you want a copy of this, I'm happy to email you a PDF of this. My email address is going to be on the very last slide, so be aware of that. And if you'll request it, I'll send it to you. But one of the things that we need to know about the next generation is that they are, to Dwayne's point, incredibly different. We know that they still want to change the world. We know that they are negatively and adversely affected by the economy and inflation. We know that across the GiveScape, they are giving less money and less time. This is kind of national data from not-for-profits. Not only are they giving less, they're volunteering less, but their thinking about giving is different. They think that sharing an idea, participating in decision making, being innovative, they think that all counts as giving. So older generations like boomers and silent gen, we tend to think of giving as financial, money. In fact, we even bifurcate time, talents, and treasure, right? Right, Dwayne?
Yep.
The younger generations don't see that categorization. They see all of that as giving. But there are some things that churches can do. They can involve them. And one of the big things, two of the big things that are in this PDF that I would invite you to consider is the relationship between the older generations and the younger generations. So according to Michael Moody, the younger generations hate the pass the baton metaphor. They don't want to have something handed to them from the older generations. They want to walk alongside the older generations and learn from their wisdom and insight, but also at the same time give have an opportunity to be innovative and to speak into those processes. That's a big piece of it. And I think that as churches begin to think about how do we connect our older generations with our younger generations, like in a mentoring relationship, that's going to be real important. And I think also it's going to be real important to try to figure out a way to give them a seat at the table. Giving them a seat at the table is going to be real important if we're going to capture those generations to more significant dollars in the future. Another good idea is to not just dump the whole thing on them. This is in the PDF, but to give them a specific project within a larger scope. So an example of that, Dwayne, might be, say that you're an executive pastor of a church that wants to build a new children's ministry building. Okay. So, the older generation like mine, we care about the bricks on the wall, right? But Gen Z and millennials care about the programs within the walls. So, what are some things that we can identify that they can buy into, whether it be technology or security or something like that? That's something that they could see that makes an impact within the walls, while the older generations are more invested in building the actual physical walls of the building. So this is a great piece. We're happy to share it with you. And if you'd like to have a conversation with Dwayne or I about that, we'd love to set up a time and schedule that to visit with you. So Dwayne, this is a data point that you found after we published the report. Talk to us about 237 churches out of the 537 churches that beat inflation over the 4 years that we reported.
So it really just comes down to what we want to do is just say, okay, so to say that the bad news is that giving went up by 19%, inflation was 21%, so really we lost ground. We started taking a look at what's true out there, and what we found is that, yeah, we have about half the churches beat inflation. And that's a pretty sizable piece. I think the part that is, so that's looking at the 20% in total. Now, I think the thing that's also going to be, that includes churches who had a substantial jump in 1 year or not. And so one of the things I know, Tim, that we're excited to be starting is a journey of taking a look at some of the true outliers as far as those who actually performed at the top of, performed best, and being able to do that. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we went in and over the 4 years, we just wanted to know how many churches year over year were at least 5% increase. So while we have 237 churches that exceeded total 21% growth, that's got a lot of volatility in it. We were looking for the consistency. Who's been able to year over year over year do 5% or more? And we identified 41 churches out of these 237 that were able to do that. And we're beginning a research project next month with Dr. Russell James from Texas Tech University to work with these churches and to interview those churches and to identify the best practices. Because if we've got churches that are doing 5 or even 10% a year for 4 consecutive years, they've got to have some best practices that we can identify and then bring that back to you through the form of research, because that could be a very, very interesting study, Dwayne, and I'm real super excited about that.
And Tim, I got to say, I'm excited about that as well, because I think, to your point, it's one thing to say that you were losing ground and then you made up a whole bunch of ground in 1 year because you did a special emphasis, but someone who is doing the block and tackling consistently year over year over year over year and seeing consistent growth, that's something we want to dig deep into. But we also want to dig into the others who, we'll be looking at the complete picture, but it'll be really interesting to see those who are ahead of the game year after year. I think that'll be really important. And by the way, I did drop into chat your email and mine, so anyone who wants it can get that easily through that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dwayne, thank you for doing that. So, one of the things, Dwayne, that we've been getting our having our email inbox blown up about has been the concerns from the since the first of the year, government efficiency, looking at potentially cutting $260 billion out of the social safety net by the elimination of that federal funding. And we're seeing a huge reaction, both of us seeing a huge reaction from the not-for-profit sector. So we wanted to conclude our webinar today with just a couple of things about that. And I'm going to start with this, Dwayne, and I'm going to let you focus on what the local churches should be doing. But let me tell you what not-for-profits are currently doing. What we're seeing in not-for-profits since the beginning of the year has been amplified activity. And I don't know how else to say it otherwise, Dwayne. We're seeing amplified activity. They have issued a call to arms, so to speak, and they are aggressively pursuing funding in anticipation that federal funding is going to be pulled back. They are really coming hard for givers that they have any kind of relationship with. We're also seeing in the not-for-profit sector that they are utilizing some of the best practices from the local church. I just got an invitation to participate in a webinar just this week, Dwayne, on how not-for-profits can utilize recurring giving. And this again is very different from very different behavior from not-for-profits. For them, typically to want to do the big event or the big gala or the big golf outing or whatever their big 3 or 4 projects are. No, now they're going after the recurring monthly giving that you set up almost like a subscription. They're really focusing on that. We're also recognizing that there's a renewed interest in not-for-profits of building community. Does that sound
Yep.
familiar, church leaders? That a not-for-profit would sit down and say, we need to build community among our donor base. We need to not only be connected to them, but we need them to be interconnected as well. So community is a big emphasis right now. And then finally, we're seeing that not-for-profits are really beginning to focus on generational giving. I had a conversation this week with the lead researcher at Giving USA. And Giving USA has released that they are getting ready to, they've just released a press release on a new release of a new study about generational giving. And they have pulled data from a major study on income from the University of Michigan, and they are using that data to try to help understand how the generations behave differently in giving. And I told the guy, Dwayne, I said, well, we have a table in Morterstone that already does that work for our local churches. So we're seeing some really interesting behavior right now from not-for-profits. And it sounds pejorative to Dwayne to say that they're desperate, but it almost feels like there's a sense of desperation, high anxiety among them. So, Dwayne, in light of that, what are some of the things that churches should consider doing? We see what not-for-profits are currently doing. What should local churches consider doing?
Well, so Tim, this was another conversation that came up in one of my meetings earlier today, and we talked about it for quite a bit. And some of it is the fact of most of the people in our church don't understand that if a nonprofit needs volunteers, if they need money, they often come talk to the church leadership. And so how do we recognize and how do we help people understand that the church is still distributing funds to and impacting the community through the giving that they're providing to us. And now that's starting to the journey of wrestling with the generation who doesn't want to give funding to one organization who is going to redistribute it because they want control over it. But we've got to start stepping in and helping people understand the power of the church to actually be God's answer to the challenges. And so how do we start to do that? How do we also make sure that we have stepped up our conversation? Because the thing that is true is there's not a single nonprofit, Tim, who's going to have a concern about telling people, if you don't give, we're going to go away. And we in the church typically don't want to do that. We don't want to be that open and transparent. And so transparent and showing our accountability in those conversations is going to be a big chunk of it as well, Tim. And so being able to just very clearly articulate, here's where we're at with our finances. Here's what we need from you and for you, and recognizing it's always what we want for you more so than what we want from you. But the key is the fact of we've got to recognize that nonprofits are going to be talking to our givers at a higher rate. And if we believe that that people are going to add to on top of what they're already giving to satisfy that, I think we're fooling ourselves. Most of them are going to look at, here's the pot that I'm willing to give. This organization that I believe in, if I don't send this dollars, they're going to go away. My church isn't telling me that they need my money. And so we have to be just really clear and transparent about what we're trying to accomplish and how we're dependent upon the giving and the generosity of our people, and continue to challenge people to grow in their understanding.
Right. Yeah, I think that whole idea of showing impact is going to be real critical.
Yep.
Local and global impact, because that's what not-for-profits have in spades. I mean, they know how to do a good job. They know how to tell a story. They know how to show in tangible ways here's the impact that your dollars make when you give to our organization. And I think that churches really miss a lot of opportunities in doing that. I was talking to a person this morning myself who said that a member of his congregation, they were talking about giving, and he said the giver came to me, and he's a physician, and he said, I want you to know that I tithe. I just don't give to our church. He said there's a church on the other side of town that really seems to be struggling, and I just feel impressed to do all my tithing to them. I serve here, I attend here, but I'm not giving here. And
Yep.
it's again, people are really concerned about the impact that their dollars make, and we've got to constantly talk about the impact that it's making. Dwayne, one of the concerns I think that we have, and I talked to John at Giving USA about this a little bit this week, is the reallocation of the giving bucket. I think that sometimes we as church leaders assume that if there's another need somewhere else, people are going to give over and above what they give to the
Mhm.
church, versus the possibility that if they have a bucket with $100 in it, they may not give an extra 10 over and above the $100. They may just reallocate and distribute the $100 they have. What do you think about how should we approach that idea? I mean, the concept of, the reallocation of dollars.
So Tim, I think we go back to the inflation conversation. Just like inflation's hit the church, impacted the giver. And so for most people, I mean, the price of eggs is not something that any of us anticipated. Tim, your price of gas that has gone up is not something that you planned for. And so all those things are impacting the givers as much as they're impacting us as the church. And so most people don't have an increase in a bucket. You know, they haven't gone from a 1 gallon bucket to a 2 gallon bucket for their giving. And so most of them are static, and so they're not going to, without great teaching and choosing to actually trust God more than where they're at today, they're not going to add to their giving. They're going to reshuffle their giving, because giving and tithing has become synonymous in a lot of ways. And so whatever I give is my tithe, and what I tithe is what I give. So, so I think those are some of the things that we have to address as church leaders, is the fact that people, buckets are not getting bigger. And so saying that, Tim, you can go give anywhere, but you don't give to our church, that if that's the approach, that's fine. But I recognize, Tim, you're going to make the decision based upon where you believe the biggest need is.
Mm-hmm.
And if the church is never talking about what the reality of the situation is, then I'm never going to know that I need to contribute if someone says I'm going away without it. So I think that's the bucket's not, in general, the bucket is not getting bigger. And I
That's
think we have to recognize that.
right. So Dwayne, we're kind of at a point here where we want to do some questions and answers, and I don't know if you've got the Q&A pulled up or if we've
I've
been
got
keeping
it.
up with that.
Yep.
Before we do that again, you can reach me if you have a question about anything, a way that Mortarstone can be helpful to you, or if you just need to have a conversation with me. Here is my contact information. And again, if you'd like a copy of that Next Gen Generosity PDF, I'm more than happy to email that to you. Just send me an email at tim.dietrich@Mortarstone, and we'll be sure to do that. So Dwayne, what are some of the questions and answers that we want to Q&A things we want to get to before we announce our next webinar?
So far, I think we've actually, in process, we've answered most everything that's come in at this point in time, Tim. So, but I just want to say, one, like Tim said, I put my email in there as well, and would love to engage and talk through any of this data. I think the thing that is true is Tim and we actually get energized by these conversations and could have these conversations. Well, unfortunately, my wife thinks 24 hours a day.
Right.
And So that's a challenge. But one of the folks put on the chat that they want to share some of this information with some other organizations and asked if we had any problems sharing this, and the answer is no. I mean, the reality of the matter is this is something that is true regardless of whether you're a church or whether you're a nonprofit. We're seeing the same conversations take place there. And Tim, like you, when I got the note from that nonprofit consultant saying, "Hey, let me teach you how to basically be a church in your giving approach," I was like, "Okay, this is really intriguing, but it's a real deal." So, and so if
Yeah.
anyone does have a question or anything, either the chat or the Q&A, we'd love to answer it.
Yeah, Dwayne, it's been a lot of fun, and we started in November, immersing ourselves in data. We did that all of November, December, and January. And
Yep.
so, what you're seeing on the webinar today is a very, very small fractional portion of all the data points that we looked at and considered, not just in terms of information, but what are the trends that we're seeing and trying to build out. And Dwayne, one of the trends that we see at Mortarstone in the data is the current and forthcoming challenge that churches have in being able to really create solid budget projections for income.
Yep. Yep.
That is with the generational shifts that we see, with the churn that we see in giving. Wow, it's getting harder and harder for churches to be able to look at their budget planning process and say, here's the number we think is an informed number for income projection, and has faith, of course. But Dwayne, why
Yep.
don't you introduce something that's coming up from Mortarstone here in the next few weeks that we're all really excited about?
I was going to say, Tim, it sounds like you're priming the pump for a great conversation, but just real quick, and this is another one I could probably talk about way too long. But as Tim talked about, one of the things that we know is that's absolutely critical in a church is being able to understand what do we believe the giving opportunities are, or what the giving will be for the church. And so we are in the process right now, and we plan on right after Easter, we'll do another webinar and we'll introduce this new product area. And it's going to be focused on helping churches build a giving forecast and then manage that forecast on a month-to-month basis. And so being able to take a look at, we talk to churches who they do a 90% of last year's is what their budget is for this next year. We see others who try to just say, hey, I think a 3% increase. And so they do a lot of things. We're actually building a tool that will go back, and everything about Mortarstone right now is much more of a rear view mirror. We want to try and give you a heads up display for what the giving might do in the future. And so really being able to create a projection engine for that, but then not just a projection engine, but each month being able to go in and say, here's what the projection said, and here's what the actual was. And so beginning to be able to provide insights into what happened in your giving against what was expected, so that you can actually start to forecast and budget with clarity. So back to the conversation, Tim, we want to be able to provide fact and insight, not have you do it based on intuition. And so we want to take that, not just looking backwards, but also looking forward and giving. And so that's what we're excited about doing. And we intend to, the week after Easter, do a webinar and announce that and walk everyone through that. So it's something that we've been working on for quite a while and excited about what's coming.
Yeah, Dwayne, thanks for sharing that. And like I said, that's going to be real exciting when we get to next month's webinar, and you'll be able to reveal that and release that.
Yep.
And we're real excited about the potential that tool will have to help churches be resourced and to have confidence in the number.
Absolutely. And Tim, I think that's the key thing. And I know that we'll be back again to talk about what we learn as we do the outlier study, and being able to bring back, because our goal would be to identify, I know, Tim, as we've talked, to identify the 3 to 5 things that these churches all do that is creating this difference. And so what's that look like? So, that'll probably be, in a few months, we'll be announcing that, and excited about that conversation as well.
Absolutely. Well, Dwayne, it's always a pleasure to get to see you and to be with you. And again, those of you on the webinar today, we would not be Mortarstone without you. We are so grateful for the work that you do in your local context, in your local church, and the impact that you're doing, both making both locally and globally. We thank you. And again, if there's any way that we can serve you, please feel free to reach out. The best way to keep in touch with what's going on at Mortarstone is to follow us on LinkedIn. We have a Facebook and a Twitter and an Instagram presence, but LinkedIn is going to be a great avenue for you to be able to look at and to follow and to see what we're doing at Mortarstone. Again, for those of you who are on the webinar, we are going to send you the recording. We're going to send you a copy of the slide deck. And we're looking forward to getting that date announced very soon about the next webinar. So on behalf of Dwayne McNally and Nikki Flaming, my name is Tim Dietrich. Thank you for joining us today. Have a blessed rest of the day and a great week.